Good afternoon, everyone. Librarian Danielle Belanger here from the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library, joining you virtually. Today, we have another great program for you. The library is thrilled to have the opportunity to host a conversation with best-selling author Stephanie Wrobel. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for taking the time to speak with me today, and to Rita at Simon & Schuster for making this event possible. Thank you also to Andreas at Paragraph Bookstore for collaborating with us on this event. If you would like more information on how to buy the book at Paragraph, we'll let you know at the end of the event. And you can also put your name down for it, of course, at the library. There is a waiting list. To begin with, I'll share a condensed bio. Stephanie Wrobel is the author of Darling Rose Gold, a USA Today and international bestseller that has sold in 21 countries and was shortlisted for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel. Wrobel grew up in Chicago and now lives in London. This Might Hurt is her second novel. Visit her at stephaniewrobel.com and connect with her on Twitter at Steph Wrobel and Instagram at Stephanie Wrobel. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us today. I believe you mentioned that you are in the United States, and congratulations on another masterfully written novel.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Before we even discuss your latest novel, This Might Hurt, could you please share with our audience your experience with libraries and writing stories as a kid?
Sure. So I've been a library patron for as long as I can remember. As a kid, it was my favorite thing in the summer, on summer breaks especially, to go to the library, bring an empty backpack and just fill it up with as many books as would fit, and come back 2 and 3 weeks later and do the same thing all over again. And, you know, that never really stopped. Even when I was writing my first book, Darling Rose Gold, I wrote a lot of it at the Boston Public Library. That's where I was living at the time. So libraries have always felt like home to me. You know, they're just nice and quiet and cozy, and you're around other book lovers. So it's really inspiring, both as a reader and writer, to just kind of spend a lot of time in them.
Very nice. We're happy to hear that. I read that after college, you worked as a copywriter, then associate creative director for advertising agencies in Chicago, and that during that time you wrote and helped produce television and radio spots, print ads, billboards, and digital campaigns for brands like Coors, McDonald's, and Capital One. What was that like, and did these skills help you later down the line?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to be a novelist, but it didn't seem like a super practical career choice. So I did the closest thing I could think of, which was copywriting, which meant, writing lots of scripts. And it was really interesting. You know, there's certainly, more parameters on what you can do creatively. Obviously, you're not just trying to entertain, you're also trying to sell something. But it's been absolutely pivotal and for sure influential on my writing as a novelist. You really learn the art of concision. You know, when you're writing copy for a billboard that can only be 7 words, you really learn the art of taking out anything that's, unessential. And so, between that and then also learning the art of rejection, I would say, is the other way that it's really, really influenced me. I was used to in advertising, like my creative director would just take my scripts and draw big X's through the ones that were no good, or, tearing ideas off the wall and stuff. Editors are much more careful with your feelings, at least in my experience in the publishing industry. So any sort of constructive criticism I get now feels very tame and presented very nicely compared to what I was used to in my first career.
Very nice. So again, I will say a big thank you to Rita at Simon & Schuster for sending me an advanced reader's copy of the book, which I was holding there just a second ago. So for those tuning in today, I will share a synopsis of the plot. Named a most anticipated book of 2022 by Newsweek, Parade, Katie Couric Media, Betches, Criminal Element, Shondaland, Bustle, and more. From the National and USA Today best-selling author of Darling Rose Gold comes a dark, thrilling novel about 2 sisters, one trapped in the clutches of a cult, the other in a web of her own lies. Welcome to Wisewood. We'll keep your secrets if you keep ours. Natalie Collins hasn't heard from her sister in more than half a year. The last time they spoke, Kit was slogging from mundane workdays to obligatory happy hours to crying in the shower about their dead mother. She told Natalie she was sure there was something more out there. And then she found Wisewood. On a private island off the coast of Maine, Wisewood's guests commit to 6-month stays. During this time, they're prohibited from contact with the rest of the world. No internet, no phones, no exceptions. But the rules are for a good reason, to keep guests focused on achieving true fearlessness so they can become their maximized selves. Natalie thinks it's a bad idea, but Kit has had enough of her sister's cynicism and voluntarily disappears off the grid. 6 months later, Natalie receives a menacing email from a Wisewood account threatening to reveal the secret she's been keeping from Kit. Panicked, Natalie hurries north to come clean to her sister and bring her home. But she's about to learn that Wisewood won't let either of them go without a fight. Stephanie, could you please discuss the idea of how the idea for this book first came to you?
Sure. So Wisewood, some people think it's a self-improvement retreat. Some people think it's a cult. And that was the impetus for the book, is I wanted to get inside the head of both people who join cults and people who lead them. That third character, Natalie, that you mentioned, who's the outsider coming in, was really a late addition. There's 3 perspectives that the book is written from. And I knew those first 2 who were more acutely involved in the cult from the beginning, but Natalie was kind of a surprise joiner later on in the ideation phase.
So as you just pointed out, this has 3 points of view, and it is not readily apparent who each of these characters are as the story progresses. I personally enjoyed this part of the puzzle. How did you decide the sequence of events, and how do you connect the dots?
Yeah, so there's, for those who haven't read, which is probably most people since it just came out yesterday, the first part goes back and forth between Natalie, the older sister, and an unidentified child, who we will continue to see her story as the story goes on. And, like I said, I knew I wanted to do these 3 perspectives. I didn't know exactly how they'd come together, but without giving anything away, that anonymous child, let's call her, I knew who she was in the character in present day as an adult. And what led to including her origin story was just a deeper exploration of, like, how did she become the person that she became? And so, I started with her in full, adulthood, and then young adult, and then adolescence, and then just kept going back and back and back further until I found the answer that I was looking for. So it wasn't necessarily something I intended to include from the beginning, but I just found her story very fascinating, and I hope readers will feel the same.
I think they will. The characters in this book can at times be dark and edgy, as is the overall mood of the novel. How did you go about achieving this, not only through the locale, but also through the characters' personalities?
So in terms of character development, I listened to a lot of Billie Eilish randomly while I was coming up with them. It's kind of got that gritty, dark, disturbing feel. Not her most recent album, but the one before. So there's little things like that you can do to kind of get you in the mood, in the mind frame. But I also think that the topics that we're dealing with here kind of lend themselves well to that. So this, Wisewood is all about mastering your fears and conquering pain. And those things can definitely be dark, when you really dive into them, whether we're talking about physical pain, or for most of the guests at Wisewood, it's oftentimes more so emotional pain. So it kind of just lends itself well to this, like, dark and disturbing sort of atmosphere.
Which was your favorite character to write, and why?
I would say my favorite character was probably Teacher, who is the leader of Wisewood. She has just, I don't know, I think she's the least like me, or I'm the least like her, thankfully. And those characters are always the ones that are the most intriguing to me. I really like to write about society's outliers, people who don't adhere to the rules like the rest of us and try to figure out why that is. And she's certainly an example of that. You know, she had an unconventional childhood with a lot of trauma in it. And so to see who she becomes and the way she sort of rises above it, yet at the same time getting stuck in some of these, you know, things that she was taught, was just a lot of fun to explore. And just, yeah, it made for a very deep psychological dive, I would say.
So this anonymous child, when she is a child in the novel, has a very difficult father. Is he based on a real person or bits and pieces of different stories?
No, he's not based on a real person. Yeah, it was just I mean, you know, I've read enough and watched enough. I mean, I thankfully have no experience with this. My dad is very normal and supportive and not crazy. But you know, you see enough of that stuff, and it's just, you know, the power of the imagination, I guess. I really wanted her to have this overbearing father who demanded perfection in his children, and demanded, you know, some sort of, if not superiority, at least some sort of extraordinary abilities, I think, to compensate for his own averageness. You know, he doesn't really view his own life as a success. And so he wants more for his children. And the way that it comes out is just, you know, horribly abusive, you know, instead of being the more encouraging route that a lot of parents go when they want their kids to, you know, be ambitious and successful.
This novel has been marketed as great for fans of Leanne Moriarty's Nine Perfect Strangers. Did you read this book? And if so, do you agree with that?
Yeah, you know, I did read the book. I haven't watched the adaptation. But yeah, I love that book a lot. I can see, again, without saying too much, I can see why the comparisons are being drawn, certainly. I mean, I will say that that resort, I think Tranquillum, it's called, felt a little more upscale, a little more kind of going toward trying to attract a certain clientele, whereas Wisewood is more like, we'll take anyone. Part of their thing is trying to make it relatively affordable, or sometimes like subsidizing people joining. So it feels a little different in that sense. It's not really about, you know, getting massages or, you know, that kind of, you know, it's less of like a spa feel. People go there and they're doing chores and stuff, you know, they're cleaning rooms, they're doing laundry. But certainly, yeah, there's definitely, with this kind of charismatic leader at the middle of it, that definitely feels, you know, obviously rings very true to this story as well.
The dynamics between sisters Natalie and Kit definitely feel authentic. Did you have your own sisters? Give the characters a read to find out if they agree.
I didn't, I mean, my sisters have read the book now, but I didn't necessarily have them like read it early on or anything. It was definitely easier to write sisters, I think, than, you know, when I was deciding who's this third character, this outsider going to be. I don't have any brothers. I obviously, there would of course be tons of similarities with siblings, regardless of gender. But for me, it was just the sister relationship is a very unique one. And because I've, you know, been part of it my whole life, it felt ripe for exploration on the page.
The other more intriguing central character, the anonymous one that we spoke about in this book, is an illusionist that performs incredible and jaw-dropping stunts. How did you go about researching this aspect of the novel? And was this character based on a real life character or bits and pieces of stories?
Yeah, so she is based on bits and pieces, I would say. I started with probably, I can't remember who came first, but like certainly David Blaine is an American illusionist who's known for doing all these crazy feats of endurance. Darren Brown, who's a UK mentalist, he does these sorts of big performances. And he was definitely an inspiration. And then also Marina Abramovic, who's an American, just like, I guess not stunt artist, but sort of like performance artist. So yeah, I kind of studied all of the different things that they were doing and why they were doing them. Some of them have very interesting thoughts on pain. yeah, all of that kind of came together. Initially, this character's performance art is more, stage based in front of a big crowd and doing smaller things like maybe that we've seen before, like eating glass or, whatever, doing like whatever sort of illusions on stage. But then she really moves on to much more dramatic things that will have a smaller crowd, but certainly get more attention. She feels the need to constantly reinvent herself. Sorry. And just keep going bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that was fun in terms of, I think those scenes and those challenges that she commits to are just so visual and cinematic. I can see them happening before my eyes. So that was a fun area to explore.
Both your novels, Darling Rose Gold and This Might Hurt, have at their center dysfunctional families. Was this intentional, and how does your family feel about this?
It was not intentional. It's funny. The books are usually described as, a mother-daughter story with Rose Gold and then a sister story with This Might Hurt. And it's interesting. I never intended to write family stories. I think it came out as a consequence of the topics that I really wanted to write about, which in the first book was Munchausen by proxy, which the mother Patty has. And in that case, it's usually a mother and child, in situations of Munchausen by proxy. So that was the reason for, that relationship. And then with This Might Hurt, like I said, once I decided I wanted this third outsider perspective, I wanted it to be somebody who would feel more obligated than a friend to come, sort of rescue this person who's gone awry, but less dedicated than a parent. So a sibling just felt like kind of the right balance between those two. So yeah, that's how I ended up with two sisters, but it was never, what I really wanted to write a book about was a cult. And it was just kind of like the sister thing just happened along the way.
I'd like to read a couple of author reviews of your book and let me know if you think they ring true.
Okay.
Ashley Audrin, a New York Times bestselling author of The Push, wrote, "A mesmerizing and original ride, expertly paced, hugely unsettling, and perfectly dark. You'll be gripped in this clever exploration of fear and vulnerability right until the flawless ending, one you'll most certainly want to talk about." And Liz Nugent, best-selling author of Little Cruelties, wrote, "I don't know if blood is thicker than water, but I know that my blood ran cold at several points reading this book. Filled with menace, this was a gripping and compulsive read from first page to last. I thought I'd never get off that island."
Yeah, it was so funny getting that really nice blurb from Liz, because that idea of like, oh my God, I just want to get out of here. I'm so glad that came across on the page, because that is, that was why I chose an island. I think it automatically has this claustrophobic feel, particularly if you don't want to be there. If you do, then it's a completely different feel. And that's what I think is kind of interesting, is juxtaposing Natalie's arrival in the winter at Wisewood versus Kit's arrival in the summer at Wisewood. One of them really wants to be there and is hoping to find something. The other one does not want to be there and wants to get away as soon as possible. And I think that, beyond islands, of course, that rings true to any setting. Whether you want to be somewhere or not, what the weather's like, all of that determines your perception of a place, how at home or how, much of a stranger you feel to it.
I noticed there were a couple of very short videos online of you at different, what looks like research for the novel. So you're either in a scene that has you're at a lake with a creepy sort of a forest, or standing around in boulders. So were you in Maine, or did you travel somewhere else to kind of visualize the setting for the book and the island portion of it?
Yeah, so I was lucky. I went to Maine for a weekend in May of 2019. And, the island itself and the facilities of Wisewood are completely made up just to my own, specs in my head. But the area is real. So I pictured it in mid-coastal Maine, specifically leaving from Rockland Harbor. So I went to that harbor because I wanted to see what Natalie would see when she arrives and tries to get on the ferry and go. And so I was lucky enough to actually hire a local ornithologist to take me around in his dinghy from island to island and just kind of take a look and see what, what does it actually look like to have an uninhabited island that someone could go in and buy and like, put this sort of facility there. So yeah, that was me just traipsing around these sorts of, some, unsold islands, some were populated, but the vast majority of them are not. It was an absolutely beautiful area. And I'm so glad that I put the book there, because I can still see it in my mind, just how blue the water is, just the number of evergreen trees. Maine is just so beautiful. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted the book to be set there, because it's got a beauty that could either, again, be perceived as just overwhelming, awe-inspiring, but also like it can feel very stark in the right or wrong conditions.
Have you been approached by anyone in order to bring this story to the big or the small screen?
So we've had, conversations, nothing official yet. Nothing, but we'll see. I mean, I would absolutely love to see it. I'd love to, collaborate with other creative people and see what it would look like on the screen, but no, nothing as of now.
You recently posted, and I quote, 2 years, 7 drafts, doubt, fear, frustration. Writing this might hurt is one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I'm so glad I saw it through. I love writing in my bones and my fingertips and every waking thought. And I hope that seal comes across in these pages. I'd have to say yes as a reader. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to any prospective writers listening in today?
So I think from a more practical perspective, usually what I say to emerging writers is set your own goals and deadlines in terms of whether it's, number of words per day or chapters, scenes, whatever, even if it's not a lot. When you're first starting out and you don't have anybody else setting deadlines for you, it's easy to just kind of deprioritize it. We all have, other work, families, whatever to attend to. But if you're really serious about it and you just want, whether you want it published or not, just to finish, I think like so many writers never get there because you're either worried about the perfection of it, or you feel like it's not going to be good enough, or, whatever, life gets in the way. So I think setting a schedule for yourself, even if it's like printing out a calendar and writing what you're going to do, each week or month or whatever. From a more inspirational perspective, I would say remembering why you're doing it. I think when you're trying to get published, it can be really easy to get caught up in, why is it taking the agent so long to respond? I'm not hearing back. What's going on? Da, 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 da. And I think if you just if your main motivator is just the love of writing and the desire to improve at the craft, then that's going to be enough to power you forward. If the only thing keeping you going is getting published, then it's a lot easier to feel rejected and give up, but for me, just this idea of I wanted to be writing regardless of what happened. It didn't matter how many people rejected me. I was just going to keep going until somebody said yes.
So I'm just going to show the cover, because when I first saw this cover, the title is This Might Hurt. Again, a 3-word title, as Darling Rose Gold. But I thought, this is a really strange cover. This might hurt, with a beautiful china plate. But I do think it refers to something that happens in the book. So I will tell everyone out there, please read the book, because then you'll say, oh no, it's this certain dish from one of the incidents that happens in the book.
Yes, and you don't have to wait very long. It's in chapter 6, so okay. You'll find it soon.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Before I turn it over to the audience and let them ask you a few questions of their own, can you please share with the audience what your next project will be?
Sure. So I recently finished a first draft of my 3rd novel, so we'll see what the feedback is on that. But it is about an American woman who's living in a giant manor in the English countryside. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 2 years. She hasn't left her house in 2 years. We don't know why at the outset. But the book begins with an elderly British woman coming to her door, and things unfold from there. Okay,
sounds very intriguing. So to the members of the audience, if you want to ask Stephanie a question, please put it into the Q&A or the chat, and Stephanie will be happy to take the question. In the meantime, I've heard that you have a dog named Moose Barwinkle. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about him?
Sure. He's a cockapoo. He's 5 years old. He's not the size of a moose. Everyone kind of assumes he must be a giant dog, but yeah, I got him when I was living in Boston, and he has been my companion in writing every day since. You know, he's always at my feet or somewhere nearby. But yeah, he's quite the ham, and basically just lies on his back all day and does nothing to contribute to the household. But he's our little mascot, and keeps us in good cheer.
Very nice. And what are you reading right now?
A novel that I recently finished and loved is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, who is a horror writer. And I've been dabbling a little more in reading horror. I wouldn't say it's my typical genre, but I really love that book. This is also a book about sisters. And the voice of the narrator is just so witty. And anytime, you can find humor in a genre that's typically not thought of as funny, like horror, I'm all for it. He also offers a really thoughtful analysis of the genre, both novels and film. So yeah, it was just, I tore through it. Like the action was amazing, but also, there was just like a lot of layers in it. So I can't recommend that one highly enough.
Thank you. So we do have a question from the audience, from Esther, who asks, who chooses the blurbs that appear on the book jacket?
So that is up to my publisher. We all kind of reach out to different authors and see if they'd like to read the book in the US, UK, and Canada. And then, each publisher decides, which quote goes on the cover. And that really varies from market to market. It just depends, I think, probably which authors are better known in some markets than others. So yeah, I have no say over that. I just kind of look at it and go, yeah, that sounds good.
And another question is, how much influence does an editor have in the writing of a book?
A lot of influence, in a good way though. So it's nothing prescriptive, but the editor is there to point out things that aren't working. Sometimes they'll offer solutions, but you certainly don't have to use those. As long as the problem gets solved, that's what matters. And honestly, when you're so close to something, you can't tell what's missing from it. You can't tell where you've been long-winded or where you need to beef things up. So I'm always excited when it's time to share things with my editors, because it feels like it's not all on me. Now it feels like somebody to talk to about it with. But yeah, that first draft, you're door closed all by yourself doing it. But from then on, the editor definitely has a lot of influence and feedback to offer.
And how has the pandemic affected your writing?
It hasn't really affected the writing so much. To be honest, the writing's kind of been a godsend in a pandemic, because you can just leave the real world and go into this fake one. And even though This Might Hurt is very dark, it's one that's completely under my control, whereas obviously the real world is not. So the trick for me with writing during the pandemic has been less about the writing itself and more about when I'm away from my desk, just trying to keep my spirits up and, trying to keep your mental health in check, which is something that we can all relate to. I think, it's certainly not exclusive to writers.
Okay. And you open this book on a Charles Manson quote. So I have to admit, this did scare me a little bit, even though the title is This Might Hurt. When I first read this quote, I thought, oh boy, what am I getting myself into? Why this quote?
So what I really loved about the quote is I feel like it addresses each of my three narrators. So one of them is looking up, one of them is looking down, and one of them is looking straight on. And I won't say who is who, but I think once you've read the book, it's probably pretty obvious. And yes, of course, the fact that Manson was also a cult leader doesn't hurt. But yeah, when I came across it, it stopped me cold. I really wasn't intending to put an epigraph in, to be honest, but it just felt so perfect for it that I couldn't resist it.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think That's all I have for today. I don't see any more questions coming in through the chat or the Q&A. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for joining us today, and good luck on the rest of your tour for This Might Hurt, which is a fantastic book. I highly recommend to everyone who's listening.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. This was fun.
Thank you. Have a
Bye.
good day, everyone. Thank you.